Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Bass Fishing Declassified. Today we're going to be talking about some jerkbait modifications that you can make to increase the number of bites that you get next time out on the water and hopefully lead to a new personal best for you. Today's episode is brought to you by Bridgeford Foods. Bridgeford Foods makes a bunch of different meat snacks like this jerky right here. They've got pepperoni, summer sausage, they've got some frozen bread products. Check them out. They are a family-run, American-made product that supports the outdoors, so we should give them a little support back. You can find them in most of your local grocery stores. They're in Walmarts across the country. It's a pretty easy product to find. I recommend giving them a try. All right, so let's head out to the first angler who's going to provide you with one of their favorite jerkbait modification tips.
For my jerkbait modification, I want to talk about how I modify the weight of my jerkbaits to change the fall rate. In general, with any jerkbait you buy on the market that is labeled a suspending jerkbait, the goal is that that bait is going to suspend perfectly in the middle of the water column and not rise or sink. Now, if you go with a high quality jerkbait like this Megabass Vision 110 Plus 2, it's going to be pretty close to suspending right out of the box. If you go a little bit less expensive, let's say a $5 jerkbait, it's usually not going to do as well. However, you can't guarantee out of the box that any of these jerkbaits are going to be perfectly suspending or neutrally buoyant, because water temperature actually has an impact on whether these jerkbaits will sink or whether they'll float or if they're perfectly suspending. Now, in general, there's a sweet spot in water temperature where a jerkbait will suspend perfectly out of the box. However, if your water temperatures are below that, let's say really cold, or above that, very hot, that jerkbait will tend to either rise or fall instead of being neutrally buoyant. Therefore, you oftentimes have to change the weighting on this jerkbait to make sure that it stays neutrally buoyant. Now, the main way that guys in the past used to change the weighting from what I learned when I was younger is to add lead tape to the bottom of the jerkbait, or to just remove hooks if they want to make the bait either lighter or heavier. The lead tape makes it heavier, removing hooks makes it lighter. And I did that for a while, but it was kind of a pain. The lead tape would fall off, it was hard to super glue it on, and I just didn't really like dealing with that. So my method of weighting my jerkbaits is a little bit different. Instead of adding stuff or removing stuff from the jerkbait, I just change out the components of the jerkbait to change the weight slightly. What I mean by this is changing out the hooks on the jerkbait and then adding additional split rings or adding lighter or heavier split rings. My standard setup on a Vision 110 jerkbait is just going to be with the stock hooks, and again, they'll be neutrally buoyant probably a good percentage of the time. If I have a jerkbait that's rising slightly, then if I add weight to the back hook hanger, the bait is going to suspend a little bit nose up with the tail back. However, if I add weight to the front hook hanger, it's going to suspend nose down with the tail up. There's no better or worse way to do it. In general, I find that the easiest for me is just to weight the front hook hanger and just have it sit like this. It's just how I've always done it. However, there are some guys like Hank Cherry on the Bassmaster Elite series who swear by having their jerkbait sink or suspend nose up with the tail down. It just kind of comes down to personal preference. I've experimented with both. I haven't seen a big difference either way, but you can definitely experiment with that. And the way that I'm going to add weight is just by increasing the size of these treble hooks. The standard Megabass treble hooks are a very light wire size 5 hook without barb shanks. And if you want to get a heavier hook on there, one way you can do is just go to a different brand of size 5 hook that might be a little bit heavier, like this Gamakatsu size 5 round bend hook. This hook is slightly heavier than the super light wire Megabass hooks, and it will cause that bait to be weighted down a little bit more, and if it's just barely rising or barely floating, it'll cause it to neutrally suspend. Now, I don't like to add any bigger hooks on here other than size 5 because the hooks will get tangled together, it makes the action worse, and so if I need to add any more weight than just that extra, a little bit bigger hook, I'll then add an extra split ring to either the front or the back hook hanger. The extra split ring, depending on the size of it, will weight that bait down a lot and cause it to sink almost, or if you add just enough weight and that bait is really rising, it'll cause it to sit perfectly in the water. I'll usually carry 5 or 6 different sizes of these split rings in my utility box, and I'll link all of those split rings and all the hooks I use to adjust these baits down in the description below. And again, I'll just add weight either to the back hook hanger or the front hook hanger, depending on whether I want it to be nose down or nose up. Now, if the bait is sinking too much, the other way that you can adjust this bait is to actually take weight away from either the front or the back hook hanger. The way I do this is by going to smaller hooks. And there are a couple of hooks I actually use to change out from these megabass if I want a lighter hook. One of those is the G Finesse series hook by Gamakatsu. If you go to a size 6 G Finesse or a size 5 G Finesse, a lot of times they'll just be tiny bit lighter than the stock megabass, and it'll cause that bait to stop sinking and go neutrally buoyant. Another option is to go to a smaller split ring on the back and go to a smaller treble hook like a G Finesse Gamakatsu size 6. And in that case, you're gonna have a little bit less weight from the split ring and a little bit less weight from the hook itself, causing that bait to, again, stop sinking and go neutrally buoyant. Basically, through a combination of changing split rings and changing your hooks, you're going to be able to adjust the way of that jerkbait. And it is basically mandatory, guys, if you want to get good jerkbait action, to check the fall rate and the suspension rate of your jerkbait before you actually go fishing. What that means is you need to toss it up by the side of the boat, twitch it down a few feet, and see if it's going to rise, be neutrally buoyant, or fall. Now, there's situations where I actually want that jerkbait to fall, and then there's some times where we want that jerkbait to sit perfectly neutral. And I talked about that in my retrieve video I made a couple of videos back about my key jerkbait retrieve. Check out the video if you haven't seen it already. It will be a great complement to this video. I also talked about all the equipment I use with these jerkbaits, so definitely check out that video after this one if you want all the details. Now to the next modification.
There's a lot of really good jerkbait modifications that you can make to baits, but one of my favorite and most cost-effective is to add a small feathered treble hook to the back. This gives the fish something to key in on. So if I'm fishing in dirtier water, it gives the bait a little bit different profile. They'll key right in on that. So anytime I'm fishing off-colored water, I like to throw a feathered treble hook. Now, my favorite time to do it is when the fish are keying in on those really small pin minnows. There's a lot of times throughout the year on different fisheries where the fish only want a really small bait. They don't want a big profiled bait like this, but they will key in specifically on that feathered treble hook because it's very similar to the forage that they're eating. So depending on where I'm at in the country, I will change my colors of the feathered treble hook. For example, in the North Country where we have rosy reds, they're a pinkish, brownish, kind of purplish, orangish colored minnow. I like to go with this orange or red colored feathered treble hook because that mimics those fish. And a lot of times the bass will key in on that back feather because they think they're eating a small forage minnow and not a larger forage species. So you're doing a really good job at matching the hatch. Now, if I move down south or I go to a lake that's got predominantly shad and the fish are feeding on those small little shad fry, that's when I'll go with a white treble hook. Now, it's very important to recognize that the fish a lot of times think they're actually eating a small minnow. Even though this big bait is there, they're keying in on that tiny little treble hook. And most of your bites a lot of times will be on that rear treble hook. Now, if I'm fishing a lake that's predominantly bluegill filled, and that's what the fish like to eat, I love to go with a Flashabou material just like this. This is very similar to the old Storm Chug Bug Flashabou tails. That does an excellent job at mimicking the tail of a bluegill or a pumpkin seed or a warmouth. And because of that, I'm going to be throwing that if I'm fishing a lake that's got a lot of bluegill in it. It's very important to recognize how much of a difference that this can make. I do want to point out that I tie all of my own, but you can buy them in the stores. Just make sure if you buy one that's in the stores that you're using one that is not very full. So you want to actually trim them down a little bit so that they're not going to impede the action of your jerkbait. If you have a feathered treble hook that's too thick, it will actually act as brakes and prevent your bait from darting back and forth. So go with something that's a lot sparser and you'll have better action on it and you'll get more bites. So remember, if you're fishing off-colored water or a fishery where the fish are keen and on really small minnows, think about going with a feathered treble hook to improve the number of bites that you'll get.
Hey guys, Kyle Cordiana here. Listen, I love to throw a jerkbait, and the team at Bass Fishing Declassified has asked me to tell you guys any kind of modifications that I do when I'm jerkbait fishing. And so I love throwing a Megabass 110, probably one of the most, if not the most popular jerkbait out there. And it's one that I love. It catches a lot of fish. It ain't cheap, But right out the box, it's a good jerkbait. It has perfect neutral buoyancy. It has that great sporadic action, great look, great different colors. But right out the package, they've got these very unique megabass hooks that they're kind of famous for. And it's got these rear-facing barbs on it, where the barbs are on the outside bend of the hook there. And the hooks are really good, but in my opinion, they're only good for a limited amount of time. After you catch a few fish on them, these hooks will start to bend out a little bit, and you'll have to start bending them back in with your pliers. And at that point, the integrity of the hook, the strength is compromised, and you're going to end up losing a lot of fish because the hook will just bend straight out and the fish will come right off. And so you need to have that in mind when you buy one of these. Again, you can catch several fish on it before those hooks become compromised, but once they are, you better be ready to swap them back out. Again, I like those hooks. They're tacky, they stick good, but you will end up losing a lot of fish on them because they'll bend out. So what I do is I take my Bubba split ring pliers, and I've gone through a lot of different treble hooks trying this, and this is one of my favorites. This is by the late great Aaron Martins. This is the G Finesse short shank treble hook. It's a tournament grade Gamakatsu hook, and more importantly, it is a size 6. I've played around with the 4s, 6s, and 8s, and in my opinion, the 6 is the one that matches the weight that comes on the megabass hook, so you keep that neutral buoyancy. The bait's going to dive correctly, and it's going to right itself in the water like a megabass does. And so a size 6 does that perfectly. Now, if I get creative, I use a lot. I use my forward-facing sonar active target by Lowrance. I use it a lot to catch fish when I'm jerkbait fishing. And sometimes those fish are deeper than any jerkbait goes, and you need your bait to sink. So I have been using these for years. If you can't tell how old this package of Storm Lure suspended dots are, I think they call them suspend strips. I've been using these for years, and they came in a massive pack. I don't even know how many are in there, but you can just tell how old that is, but they work fantastic. And all they are these little lead strips. If you haven't seen them, they've got dots too, but these are strips, and these are what I use when I want my jerkbait to start sinking. And if I want to get it really down there, I can bomb it out there, give it a few twitches to get it started, and depending on how much I want it to sink, I can start adding these spin strips to it, and that bait will start sinking. I can watch it on my active target, and I get that bait deeper. The trick to that is I'm going to save you guys a little bit of time, is you might be wondering, where do I put these on the jerkbait? So I've got an old jerkbait here that I use for example. And here, on this particular jerkbait, I had to put one on each side to keep the weight even, to keep it keeled correctly, and to make it sink how I wanted to. The other option you could do is you could put one lengthwise on the belly, right? Or you could wrap them around like so, evenly. But the most important thing I can tell you is any kind of weight that you want to add to this with these suspend strips, you want to put it in between these two hooks. You want to put it between the front hook and the middle hook. That's where you can add weight to this bait. You can throw it out there, twitch it, and get it how you want it. But don't add weight back here. It tail sinks, and don't add weight to the front. It kind of wants to head sink. So put the weight in between here and there. Again, you can align it how you want. It is going to affect the way the bait looks. So I do like the fact that these are kind of flashy, so to speak. So they still look kind of shady. But if you want to put it on the bottom and set it up on the side because you think it affects the color of the bait, that's up to you as an angler. But that's a great place to do it. And then one last little trick. I don't know if I really recommend this, but this is something I've actually caught some fish on when I got in a pickle and I needed my jerkbait down deep. I just took your standard O split shot. I mean, literally, I pulled these out of my crappie bag and I put them in my bass bag, and I literally just take my pliers and I'll pinch that straight to the weight of the center hook, right? Straight to the shank of the center hook, or I'll actually give up one of my trebles. So I'll actually pinch it as close to the center as I can, right there, like that, if you can see that. I'll pinch it right there. I don't want to do it. And that will actually make that bait sink really good, really fast. And if you need to get your bait way down there, that's a quick little modification you can do on the fly to get your jerkbait down there deep. And you still got 8 out of 9 hooks ready to go. So, but you do lose one. Anyway, hope that's kind of fun to try. Get out there, get you some suspend dots or some lead little pinch weights there, split shots, and get your jerkbait down there a little deeper. Look at them with your active target, and I promise, that'll catch you some more fish that you're not catching when you're just using that normal suspended jerkbait. See you guys on the next one.
Hopefully you learned a couple of modifications that you can make to your jerkbaits to increase the number of bites that you get on your local lakes. Thanks for watching. Make sure in the comment section you let us know how we're doing. Are there topics you want us to cover? Throw that in there as well. Otherwise, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and stay tuned for the next Bass Fishing Declassified episode.